Welcome to the Wright Science Daily Revision Boost. First of all, big congratulations to our top 3 scorers from day 14, which were Fatima with 100%, well done, Luke, Aoife and Bamidele, and then Alicia. Well done folks, see if you can keep it up. Today's daily formula is for the energy transferred in kilowatt hours. So to work out the energy transferred in kilowatt hours, we do the power in kilowatts times the time in hours. In today's Biology Blast, we're going to have a look at the menstrual cycle and contraception. So the menstrual cycle is our monthly cycle that gets the body ready for pregnancy, and it lasts about 28 days in humans. At the bottom, you've got the picture of the female reproductive system there. So we've got the ovaries, which are where the eggs mature, the uterus, where the fetus develops, the cervix, the entrance to the uterus, but the vagina is where the sperm actually enter, and the fallopian tube is where the egg is fertilized before it travels down to the uterus. What we find happens is that each month the lining of the uterus starts to thicken in order to be ready to receive a fertilized egg. And at the same time that's happening, an egg starts to mature in one of the ovaries, and about 14 days later that egg is released from the ovary, and that's the process called ovulation, the actual release of the egg. From there, the egg is going to travel down the fallopian tube, where if sperm is present it may be fertilized, and then if the egg is fertilized it may implant in the uterus lining, where it's protected and receives all the nutrients and oxygen from the mother it needs to develop. If the egg's not fertilized, then what happens is the uterus lining is removed from the body, and that is the actual period or menstruation. This whole cycle is actually controlled by 4 hormones which are made in the pituitary gland and the ovaries. First one, follicle stimulating hormone or FSH, is made in the pituitary gland and causes an egg to mature and stimulates the production of estrogen. Second one, estrogen, this is produced in the ovaries and causes the uterus lining to thicken, FSH to be inhibited and LH to be stimulated. Third one, luteinizing hormone or LH, this is again made in the pituitary gland and causes ovulation. And then finally, progesterone is the one that maintains the uterus lining and inhibits LH production. Obviously not everyone is going to want to have a baby every time they have sex, and therefore we have different methods of contraception which are all about preventing pregnancy. These fall into 2 groups. The first one, hormonal. These use hormones to disrupt the normal female reproductive cycle, and the non-hormonal ones are barrier methods that prevent the sperm from reaching the egg, or physical devices that release chemical compounds which will kill the sperm, or chemicals that prevent the egg from implanting. We need to know examples of those different types of contraception. So non-hormonal ones, condoms, diaphragms and IUDs, and the hormonal ones, the combined pill, the progesterone pill and the IUS. Quick reminder of today's daily formula: the energy transferred in kilowatt hours is the power in kilowatts times the time in hours. Today's chemistry check, we're going to look at electrolysis. So when we're talking about electrolysis, this is the process that splits chemicals using electricity. So we pass an electric current through a compound, causing a chemical change. To actually carry this out, we're going to need 2 electrodes made of metal or graphite. They conduct the electricity to the electrolyte. We need the electrolyte, which is a compound in a liquid state or solution. And we need the electrical supply, a power pack for example. You need to remember that the negative electrode is called the cathode, the positive electrode is the anode, and then the positive ion is the cation, the negative ion is the anion. When we talk about a binary ionic compound, this is one made of just 2 elements, hence binary, bi meaning 2. So to give you the example of lead bromide, the cathode produces the lead because lead makes positive ions, and the anode produces the bromine because bromide are negative ions. So what we find here is you've got to add 2 electrons to the lead to make our lead atoms, and our bromide ions have to lose an electron each to make bromine gas, which always goes around as a diatomic molecule. When we're selecting our electrode, we use inert electrodes because they're not changed in electrolysis. So we use unreactive metals like copper or platinum or graphite. If we're talking about something that's in an aqueous solution, is dissolved in water, and water is partially ionized. So that means it's got small concentrations of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. So that if we've got our aqueous solution, what we see is the situation at the bottom. So we've got 4 hydrogen ions, which will gain 4 electrons, 1 each, to make 2 molecules of hydrogen gas. And then our hydroxide ions will form our water molecules, oxygen gas, and release 4 electrons. When we're working out what's made at the anode and what's made at the cathode, we've got to remember a couple of rules. First one, hydrogen is always produced at the cathode unless ions from a less reactive metal are present, so they're the ones under hydrogen on the right, and oxygen is produced at the anode unless ions from an element in group 7 are present. When we talk about electroplating, this uses non-inert electrodes, so these ones will change, and that's important. In electroplating, the cathode is the object we want to coat, the anode is the metal we want to coat it with, and the electrolyte is a solution containing ions of the coating metal. So what we find is the metal ions from our electrolyte are discharged on the surface of our object, and that means they cover the surface. We can also use electrolysis for purifying copper. So the anode is impure copper, the cathode pure copper, and the electrolyte is copper sulfate solution. So the cathode gains copper atoms and therefore increases in mass. The anode loses copper atoms and decreases in mass, and the impurities from the anode collect underneath as sludge. Our last use of electrolysis is to extract aluminium. First thing, we dissolve the aluminium oxide in cryolite to lower the melting point. We then put that into our electrolysis cell. We've got our carbon anode and cathode there. Oxygen will form at the anode, which then reacts with the carbon of our actual electrode to make carbon dioxide, and aluminium is produced at the cathode. Because our aluminium ions are positive, Al3+, they gain 3 electrons to make aluminium atoms, whereas at the anode, oxygen ions, so O2-, are then going to form oxygen gas and release 4 electrons. Quick reminder of today's daily formula: the energy transferred in kilowatt hours is the power in kilowatts times the time in hours. In our physics prep today, we're going to go over the structure of the atom and how we came up with its model. First scientist, John Dalton, carried out experiments to see how the elements combine, and he came up with the idea that an atom is a very small indestructible sphere. He said that all atoms in an element are the same, and atoms in one element are different from atoms in other elements. The second scientist was J.J. Thomson, and he used cathode rays which were given out by hot metals, and he discovered they're made from electrons, and he worked out that these electrons are negative. So he came up with this idea of the plum pudding model to explain the neutral atom. So he said there's this positive cloud with these negative electrons embedded in it. The third scientist is Ernest Rutherford, who worked with Geiger and Marsden, and he discovered some materials emit positively charged alpha particles. And when he fired those alpha particles at gold foil, then he couldn't explain his results using the plum pudding model. So he said that the atoms have a nucleus which is positively charged and therefore deflected the alpha particles. The fourth and final scientist is Niels Bohr, who suggested that electrons only moved in fixed orbits called electron shells, and this is still the model we use today. Last thing to remember, an atom is about 1 × 10⁻10 meters in diameter, and the radius of the nucleus 1 × 10⁻15 meters. If you want to know more about our structure of the atom, then go on over to the link just below. Final reminder of today's daily formula: the energy transferred in kilowatt hours is the power in kilowatts times the time in hours. Now we've had a quick recap, then head on over to socrative.com and test your knowledge on the topics from today. The room name you need to enter is Wright 2662. Good luck! As always, if there's anything we've gone through today you're not 100% certain on, head on over to the playlists and watch the more in-depth videos. So for biology it's B3, for chemistry C3 and for physics P1.